Okay. And it looks like I am live. Yay! Live with nobody in here. That's okay. Alright. So this is me trying to get through Wealth of Nations. And thank you for joining me or not, as the case may be. I am not an economist. If anything, I'm more of an anthropologist. That's how I was trained. And this is about this is the Wealth of Nations. And I'm reading from chapter 4, and the reason I'm doing that is because I remember a long time ago, back in school, in high school, everybody loved to quote from certain passages from the Wealth of Nations, and I don't think anybody actually had read that book. They just kind of were echoing each other, and I have no idea what's in it. What I do know is that this is supposed to be the kind of the foundation of our economic system, and everybody can see that things have gone wrong. My question is this because what was the intent? What was the end goal supposed to be? What if we had followed this blueprint the way that we started out trying to do? Where would we have ended up? Would it have looked anything like what we have today? And we've had there have been a couple of things that have indicated that where we have deviated from this. One of them was the notion that the workers should partake in the success of the enterprise, which to me isn't just subsistence wages or anything like that. It's meant to be, if the company does well, the workers do better than they were before. And that's something that we have not really implemented at all. And I think that right there goes a long way towards explaining the difference between how it was originally pictured by Adam Smith and where we've ended up today. I can't think of any country that actually really implements that. I think the closest thing that I can think of would be like a worker-owned co-op. But chapter 4, book 1, because this has multiple books in this book, because that was apparently a thing back in the day. Remember, this was published in 1776. So this is like old stuff with old language, old kind of structure to it. So things that we probably wouldn't have. This book probably wouldn't have been written the same way if it was written today. It would have been structured differently. Wouldn't have separate books like that, because it was never printed separately, as far as I know. I haven't found any explanation for why it was divided the way it is, but it was. So, chapter 4, the origin and use of money. And just to let you know, I have not read this before. This is like the first time I've read this, so I have no prepared statements. I have no prepared anything. This is just my, I'll be responding to it. Think of me kind of as Simon Whistler, how he does things. This is supposed to be that kind of thing. I actually conceived of this before I started watching Simon Whistler stuff, because I'd seen his face, of course, before, but I just started watching him maybe like 2 months ago, and so this is very much like his Decoding the Unknown, where he's like, okay, I just handed the script, and I'm cold reading it, and this is kind of how I'm doing it. The script was just written a long time ago. All right, so Chapter 4, The Origin and Use of Money. When the division of labor has been once thoroughly established, it is but a very small part of a man's wants which the produce of his own labor can supply. He supplies a far greater of them by exchanging that surplus he supplies a far greater part of them by exchanging that surplus part of the produce of his own labor, which is over and above his own consumption, for such parts of the produce of other men's labor as he has occasion for. Every man thus lives by exchanging, or becomes in some measure a merchant, and the society itself grows to be what is properly a commercial society. But when the division of labor first began to take place, this power of exchanging must frequently have been very much clogged and embarrassed in its operations. One man, we shall suppose, has more of a certain commodity than he himself has occasion for, while another has less. The former, consequently, would be glad to dispose of, and the latter to purchase, a part of this superfluity. But if this latter should chance to have nothing that the former stands in need of, no exchange can be made between them. The butcher has more meat in his shop than he himself can consume, and the brewer and the baker would each of them be willing to purchase a part of it. They have nothing to offer in exchange except the different productions of their respective trades, and the butcher is already provided with all the bread and beer which he has immediate occasion for. No exchange can, in this case, be made between them. He cannot be their merchant, nor they his customers, and they are all of them thus mutually less serviceable to one another. In order to avoid the inconveniency of such situations, every prudent man in every period of society, after the first establishment of the division of labor, must naturally have endeavored to manage his affairs in such manner as to have at all times by him, besides the peculiar produce of his own industry, a certain quantity of some one commodity or another, such as he imagined few people would be likely to refuse in exchange for the produce of their industry. Many different commodities, it is probable, were successively both thought of and employed for this purpose. In the rude ages of society, cattle are said to have been the common instrument of commerce, and though they must have been the most inconvenient one, yet in old times we find things were frequently valued according to the number of cattle which have been given in exchange for them. Now, with this, he says that that this seems odd, that it must have been a most inconvenient one, but actually cattle were very convenient for the simple fact that they transport themselves. I mean, there's no need to hire a cart to move a bunch of cattle around from one place to another. You herd them there. That's why we don't really do it these days. But you just drive your cattle to wherever they needed to go. That was just kind of how you did things. They transported themselves. You just had to go along with them and make sure that they head in the right direction because of herd. And that's another thing is that they were a herd. They're herd animals, so they stick together. All you had to do is direct them as to where to go, and hopefully be able to stop them when you need them to stop. And you have dogs to help you with this a lot of times because they're predators and pack animals, and they are, especially specific breeds, were kind of bred for the purpose of doing this. We call them, today we still refer to them as work animals, and this is just how things used to be. I mean, when you look at, say, and he talks about this being very common, and I have no doubt that it was, because cattle were even if you go back to, say, Catalhoyuk and places like that, you see evidence of, in the Neolithic, of a sort of worship of cattle, they say, and I don't doubt that. things like bullfighting, we know goes back to Minoan times, when that was where we're pretty sure that bull jumping was kind of an act of worship. So this is something that we have, like, this aspect of that is still a remnant of this tradition that goes back like 10,000 years at least, and it's centered around cattle. And the reason is because cattle are just so useful, and they're useful as a medium of exchange because they move. Everybody needs their products or wants their products. They're very, and not just the cattle as sources of meat, because we talk about, oxen. Oxen are cattle. They're gelded cattle. They're gelded male cattle that have, that are put to pulling stuff around. That's what oxen always were. And so they were also labor. They were not just transporting themselves, but they would transport you and everything that you might want moved from one place to another. Not fast, but certainly a lot easier than pulling yourself. And if you've ever watched like any of if you've watched like what's his name, Lindy Beige, his I don't know, like hour and a half, 2 hour long thing on the importance of bridges in medieval England, he talks about the difficulty of long range transport across England by oxen, and there were tremendous difficulties in that compared to what we see today in land-based transportation, because we saw those things, right, with trucks and good roads and all this stuff. But from the very beginning, I think this was all just a part of the importance of cattle to human cultures as they settled down. And even, we say before they settled down, but chances are, I would think that back then, in what we call Catalhoyuk and places like that, what we actually are seeing is a form of pastoralism, of nomadic herders settling down, and that kind of, and it's hard not to extrapolate that to other ancient sites in Turkey that are maybe just 1,000 years or more, just 1,000 years earlier or something. That that maybe they weren't the hunter-gatherers that everybody that's popularly talked about, but maybe they were pastoralists as well, because that just provides such a steady amount of resources, of labor, that you just carry with you. When times are bad, you just up and move your stuff. And so I can see that being such a central thing. So I really take issue with his characterization of cattle being inconvenient, or they weren't. They were like the most central, convenient thing that people who were in kind of that area where you had cattle and stuff, where you had aurochs and things like that, and that this is, once you have the concept down, this provides so much benefit to the entire community. And so I don't know, this, as I said in previous videos, we have the benefit of a whole bunch of information that has been uncovered since then, since this book was written. So there's always these things. There's like, well, this is kind of unusual. This is, must have been inconvenient, because he wasn't able to put himself into this kind of frame of mind that we have today when we look at these kinds of things. The armor of Diomedes, says Homer, cost only nine oxen, but that of Glaucus cost 100 oxen. Now, which is kind of interesting, because I don't know. Okay, I mean, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this. I am going to do this. This is going to be the most riveting video you have ever seen, because I'm going to take my phone out, because I only have one monitor, so I'm going to take my phone out. I'm going to look up armor of Diomedes, see if there's like, see if there's actually anything about. I doubt it, but now that he's mentioned, why would it have been? Why was it valued that high? Yeah, this is. No, I did not say armor of Diomedes. I said armor of Diomedes. Come on. Diomedes, a king of Argos and a favored warrior of Athena, possessed a cuirass crafted by the god Hephaestus, marking him the only Achaean warrior besides Achilles to carry armor made by a god. Composite construction featuring a bronze helmet with elaborate cheek guards and crests, sizable epaulets, and a torso armor composed of two anatomical parts, frontal and dorsal, that lock together with pin socket systems. So this is something from Homer, from the Iliad. Now, there wasn't one Homer; it was a Homeric tradition, and what we see today is kind of the most common one. It was an oral tradition, but it's known that there were other versions of the same stories that were passed down. Which is kind of interesting, because because we have this popular conception of Homer as the blind poet, and I've never really figured out where we got that characterization from. It's one of those things of somebody came up with this, and could have been the Greeks themselves, the ancient Greeks, during their oral tradition period. I don't know. But he also inherited a golden breastplate from his father Tydeus, which was created by a mortal smith, but blessed by Athena. This piece bore a crest of a boar on the breast. His other equipment included a round shield marked with a boar and a spear that, unlike his father's sword, was not enchanted. Now, Glaucus's golden armor. So let me look that up. Glaucus's golden armor. Okay, so apparently the armor, given to him in part by, forged by a god, and another part made by a mortal but blessed by a goddess, was worth only 9 cattle, 9 oxen, according to Glaucus was a Trojan hero who traded his golden armor to the Greek warrior Diomedes as a gesture of guest friendship. Quote unquote, xenia was the term for the guest friendship. This exchange occurred in Book 6 when the two warriors discovered their grandfathers were once friends, leading them to refrain from fighting. Although the armor was valued at 100 oxen, far more than Diomedes' bronze set worth only 9 oxen, Glaucus surrendered it, an act attributed by the text to Zeus clouding his judgment. Now this is really interesting, because you have obviously gold a golden set of armor is going to be made of at least partially from gold, or had the appearance of gold, whereas he had bronze. I would not want to fight in a golden set of armor, in a set of golden armor, if it was truly gold, and if it was valued at 100 oxen. First of all, chances are that stuff is going to be highly ornate, and Nick is just going to ruin the finish. I mean, that's all there is to it. Second of all, it's going to be heavy. Now, I'm guessing this was just golden in appearance, and probably more like something like Electrum, which was a combination of gold and silver. That kind of was what the first coins that we know of were made from. But I mean, and it may have just been like overlaid with gold or whatever. But regardless, gold does not make a good armor. You want something that's solid, something that's going to take a blow, and gold is famously soft. That's the bronze. I mean, bronze was also soft, but a lot harder than gold would have been, unless the gold was alloyed, and that probably was the case. Maybe they were of equal hardness. I don't know. We don't really have any evidence either way. But this is interesting to me because these two were supposed to be there. They had grandparents in common, that's why they did this. And there was, so you had Glaucus from Troy, and you had Diomedes from Greece, and so they were on opposite sides. Somehow they found out that they were that their grandparent, that they shared a grandparent, and that was enough for them to stop fighting each other. That doesn't mean that they didn't fight for their sides, they just didn't fight against one another. And I don't know, to me that's just kind of, that whole thing is kind of fascinating to me. And it's one of those things where, I mean, I've read the Iliad before a couple times when I was younger. I don't really remember that story, but then there are so many little things, little pieces of that where you have these cultural overtones that just kind of intrude into there. That this was okay. This was seen as, that this was something that both of them saw as a point of honor, that we trade something of value to one another, something that is vital for our survival to one another. And the value in oxen or coin or however doesn't matter. It's the fact that there is this exchange going on, which kind of, in my mind, kind of undercuts part of his thing about store of value, because this was not something that was done on a commercial basis. It's odd that he brings this up, because this instance would not have had anything to do with the value of money, or money as a storage for value for commerce, because this would have been a ritual that had nothing at all to do with money. In fact, probably bringing value into it would have been considered a taboo, because that was not the point of it, And so to me, just the fact that this is brought up is now he's saying that value that these were valued according to the number of cattle. So he's not saying that this was something that was. He's not claiming that there was any commercial intent here. He's just saying that they were valued in heads of cattle. And that kind of shows the even back then, if something was more utilitarian, it wasn't valued as much. I mean, the only reason why you would value a suit of golden armor more than something that was practical is because it was just conspicuous consumption, or it itself may be acting as a store of value since it's gold. But if this couldn't have been actual gold, it just couldn't have been, because although we were talking, this is like, Age of Mythology stuff with them and all this stuff, this is all mythical things, even to the classical Greeks who retold this story. This was all mythical, all time. The Greeks had this thing where, like, the first, I think, dozen kings of Athens were mythical figures. And then at some point, the stories start talking about the actual leaders of Athens. But nothing before then is there any evidence for. All you have are these stories that are like, for example, the story of Perseus. He was one of the mythical or legendary kings of Athens. Not a historical figure. Whether the Greeks viewed him as an actual historical figure, I don't know. I doubt it. At least not all of them did, because we know that Plato had a lot of things to say in his writings about the mythical origins of all this stuff and all that. He really didn't have much use for the concept for the kind of cosmology of the Greek traditions. He had a far different conception of reality that showed through in his books, and I think in the Republic especially, he talks about reincarnation and the passage of the soul from this world to a waiting world and back to this world again through like springs and stuff. And I remember that because it's so different than what is taught to us today when mythology is taught about how the Greeks saw the world, which just shows that there may have been a cultural recognition of, these stories that are important to us and that we repeat them, but we don't actually think that this is the way the world works. But it's just, I don't know, the thought of a golden suit of armor is just, imagine wearing that thing, how heavy it would be. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that and go on. Salt is said to be the common instrument of commerce and exchanges in Abyssinia, a species of shells in some parts of the coast of India. Dried cod at Newfoundland, tobacco in Virginia, sugar in some of our West India colonies, hides or dressed leather in some other countries, and there is at this day a village in Scotland where it is not uncommon, I am told, for a workman to carry nails instead of money to the baker's shop or the alehouse. And that's interesting. Nails. And it's interesting to me that he talks about nails here, because he mentioned nails in the previous chapter in saying how how uneconomical it would be for a nail factory, a nail plant, to exist in the Highlands of Scotland. He used that as a specific example. because there'd just be nowhere to trade the nails for, unless you make the nails into money. And he said, I'm told for a workman to carry nails instead of money to the baker shop or the alehouse. Well, if then nails is being used as a store of value and are money. So you don't say instead of money, it would be as money. And I find that interesting that he phrases it in that way. In this section, in this part of this paragraph where he's talking about different types of money. Maybe it's too close to him. Maybe, the thought of this being part of the UK where he lived. So, obviously it wasn't money because we know what money is here. But, I don't know. In all countries, however, men seem at last to have been determined by irresistible reasons to give the preference for this employment to metals above every other commodity. Metals can not only be kept with as little loss as any other commodity, scarce anything being less perishable than they are, but they can likewise without any loss be divided into any number of parts, as by fusion those parts can easily be reunited again, a quality which no other equally durable commodities possess, and which, more than any other quality, renders them fit to be the instruments of commerce and circulation. The men who wanted to buy salt, for example, had nothing but cattle to give in exchange for it, must have been obliged to buy salt for the value of the whole ox or a whole sheep at a time. And again, I have an issue with that characterization, because must have been obliged to buy salt to the value of a whole ox or a whole sheep at a time. No, he could have paid for it over time. And here's an idea. A man who wanted to buy salt. Here's salt, and a cattle, and you make cured beef with the salt and the cattle, and you split that up between them. There are other things that can be done rather than just say, oh, well, here's like a cow's worth of salt at a time. If you're doing barter, if you're trading services for one another for excess, there's so many of these old things here that he says that I just, when I start digging down into them, I just have an issue with his thinking. I'm with him on his central thesis, but the specifics just leave me kind of scratching my head. And again, probably because he was writing in the 1770s and doesn't have access to everything that we have today, so he didn't have like all this. But he does. But again, this is just one of those things where I feel if he had thought through these things a bit more, he would have come to some of these conclusions on his own. He just didn't think them through. Anyway, he could seldom buy less than this because what he was to give for it could seldom be divided without loss, and if he had a mind to buy more, he must, for the same reasons, have been obliged to buy double or triple the quantity, the value to it of 2 or 3 oxen, or of 2 or 3 sheep. If, on the contrary, instead of sheep or oxen, he had metals to give in exchange for it, he could easily proportion the quantity of the metal in the precise quantity of the commodity which he had immediate access for. Now, something is hitting my brain here, which makes me wonder if he's going to get into doubloons and pieces of 8. And one of the things that we have that we kind of don't recognize anymore is that in the UK, going back a long time to post-Roman England, people would literally cut up coins, and they were made to be cut up. They would have they would have designs that existed in 4 different quadrants of the coin, so that you could cut them into 4 equal pieces, and they would be already marked as a quarter of the value of the whole thing. That's why we have quarters as a coin today, is because that was literally would have been, before they made the quarter coin, in the old days back in England, they would have cut up a coin, potentially, and used a piece as a quarter. The thing of it is that you don't want people tampering with your money. You get into shaving the edges and all that stuff, and all sorts of different ways to game the system, especially if metal is valued at different places, or in different values at different places. So you can take coins from one and then just use them as base metal in the other and get more value from them, which is I think Isaac Newton was the one who kind of came up with a way to stop that from happening. I believe I read that. I could be wrong. Anyway. So okay. Different metals have been made use of by different nations for this purpose. Iron was a common instrument of commerce among the ancient Spartans, copper among the ancient Romans, and gold and silver among all the rich and commercial nations. Those metals seem originally to have been made use for this purpose in rude bars without any stamps or coinage. Thus we are told by Pliny, upon the authority of Timaeus, an ancient historian, that till the time of Servius Tullius, that'd actually be Servius, the V was pronounced as W by the Romans. Anyway, the Romans had no coin money, but made use of unstamped bars of copper to purchase whatever they had occasion for. These rude bars therefore performed at this time the function of money. The use of metals in this rude state was attended with 2 very considerable inconveniences. First, with the trouble of weighing, and secondly, with that of assaying them. In the precious metals, where a small difference in the quantity makes a great difference in the value, even the business of weighing with proper exactness requires at least very accurate weighs and scales. The weighing of gold in particular is an operation of some nicety in the coarser meals. Indeed, where a small error could be of little consequence, less accuracy would no doubt be necessary. Yet we should find it excessively troublesome if every time a poor man had occasion either to buy or sell a farthing's worth of gold, he was obliged to weigh the farthing. The operation of assaying is still more difficult, still more tedious, and unless a part of the metal is fairly melted in the crucible with proper dissolvents, any conclusion that can be drawn from it is extremely uncertain. Before the institution of coin money, however, unless they went through this tedious and difficult operation, people must always have been liable to the grossest of frauds and impositions, and instead of a pound weight of pure silver or pure copper, might receive in exchange for their goods an adulterated composition of the coarsest and cheapest materials, which had, however, in their outward appearance, been made to resemble these metals. To prevent such abuses, to facilitate exchanges, and thereby to encourage all sorts of industry and commerce, it has been found necessary in all countries that have made any considerable advances towards improvement to affix a public stamp upon certain quantities of such particular metals, as were in those countries commonly made use of to purchase goods. Hence the origin of coin money and of those public offices called mints, institutions exactly the same name with those of alnagers and stamp masters of woolen and linen cloth. All of them are equally meant to ascertain by means of a public stamp the quantity and uniform goodness of those different commodities when brought to market. Well, okay. That was a paragraph. So basically he's talking about stamping. He's talking about the importance of stamping coins. And there's I don't know where this originated from, what I'm about to say. I know that I heard it from somewhere here on YouTube. I haven't, this just came to my mind. I haven't researched it at all, so it could be completely not right. But my understanding is that the origin of stamp money was the idea that the crown, whoever issued the money, whoever issued that coin, was guaranteeing that the coin could be redeemed for a certain value of something. And the point to keeping it pure and not debased was that the value of the coin was the value of what you're going to get. So, but what it meant was that, and I don't know if this is accurate or not. It's so hard to tell, man, unless you're like a specialist in these things. I know that one of the reasons for the coin money was control, as opposed to Ruud Bar saying that no, only we have the authority to do this. That the state determines the value of the money. You may have bars of gold, but they're bars of gold, they're not money. Money has our official stamp on it. It's a means of controlling the economy to a certain extent. But it was also a point of marketing. It was a point of marketing because rulers would often, well, I guess from Roman times on, it was common for rulers to have their face on money. They were issued during their. I know, like we know of like 3 or 4 Roman emperors only because of their likeness on money, and we've never found any written records of their existence outside of they had coins minted with their face on them, which also is another use of money, which is recording history. But also coins would circulate beyond the border of a country. Not every country had access to gold, to silver, and if you didn't, but you wanted to be a part of the trading ecosystem that was happening around you, you would just have to use the coins that came into your country from other countries, and because you couldn't stamp anything. You didn't have coins to stamp yourself. Coins were political. They were a means of showing off that you had access to the gold and silver, and that you were trading with people who wanted what you had. And as your coins moved to other places, that was considered a mark of your influence. The more widely circulated your coins were, and this was kind of a double-edged sword, at least it turned into one, where later on, especially in Europe, there would be kind of restrictions placed on the circulation of coins outside of the country that minted them, because you're literally taking coins from your silver or gold stockpile, right? And you're making them into coins, and then you're circulating the coins. Well, if the coins are circulating outside of your border, on the one hand, that's saying, hey, your economy is doing really well, it's expanding and all that, literally expanding because you're now, involving more trade. However, there's still only so many coins in existence, and so you have to introduce more coins in order to meet the demand as the influence grows outside of your border. So if you want to be really influential, you need to have an excess of gold and silver far beyond what was necessary to support your own system, and you had to kind of and of course other people, other countries, other kingdoms would have the same issues. And so the fact that your coins circulate far beyond your boundaries was itself a sign that you were rich and powerful enough as a country to sustain that circulation of true wealth beyond your own borders. And this is especially true if the coins are made of mostly pure metal, because silver and gold can be melted down, and then it can be used for whatever. So the fact that they're still being circulated also means that people find enough value in having these that it outweighs whatever melting them down might get them. It's an interesting thing, because you literally could end up supplying other people with your own nation's wealth and not have any real tracking over it. Not really, you just have like these coins evaporating into thin air and have nothing to show for it as a country, as a kingdom. To me, there are all sorts of different things going on there. The weighing of gold in particular is an operation of some nicety in the coarser metals. Indeed, where a small error would be of little consequence, less accuracy would no doubt be necessary. Okay. The operation of assaying is still more difficult, still more tedious, and unless a part of the metal is fairly melted in the crucible with proper dissolvents, any conclusion that can be drawn from it is extremely uncertain. Before the institution of coin money, however, unless they went through this tedious and difficult operation, people must always have been liable to the grossest frauds and impositions, and instead of a pound weight of pure silver or pure copper, might receive in exchange for their goods an adulterated composition of the coarsest and cheapest materials, which had, however, in their outward appearance, been made to resemble those metals, to prevent such abuses, to facilitate exchanges, and thereby to encourage all sorts of industry and commerce. It has been found necessary in all countries that have made any considerable advances toward improvement to fix a public stamp upon certain quantities of such particular metals, as were in those countries commonly made use of to produce goods. Hence the origin of coin money and of those public offices called mints. these mints, and I always thought that, you know, the easiest way to make coins would have been to melt down the metals, pour them into molds, and pop them out, because you can reuse them that way. Instead, they would have a hammer, and they would have a plate with the picture on one side, being held on a metal base, and then you have a rod with the other side of the coin on it, and you put the blank coin between them, and you'd strike it as hard as you could, in order to flatten it a little bit and imprint the image on it. And that's why we say that money is struck, because literally that's how it was done before money was printed, coins, and we still use that terminology today. And what that means is that a lot of times it wasn't perfectly centered. A lot of times it meant that it there wasn't much uniformity among the coins. It was a tedious process to produce coin. A lot of labor involved. I just find that interesting that was easier than pouring molds, because those blanks had to come from somewhere, right? Somebody was producing those blanks. It was probably like having a plate that was however thick, and then basically cutting it out by essentially the same method that was used to strike the coins. So why would you not have it in the same process? Why would you not have, like, instead of creating the blanks and then striking them, just strike them as you're creating them? I don't know. I'm not mechanically inclined, and even I can come up with, even I'm looking at this, there's something odd about this, and that's kind of apart from the whole not doing the casting, but doing the striking. Just do the striking when you make the plate. I don't know. Never really thought of that before now. The first public stamps of this kind that were affixed to the current metals seem in many cases have been intended to ascertain what it was both most difficult and most important to ascertain, the goodness or fineness of the metal, and to have resembled the sterling mark, which is at present affixed to gold plates and bars of silver, or the Spanish mark, which is sometimes affixed to ingots of gold, and which, being struck only on one side of the piece and not covering the whole surface, ascertains the fineness but not the weight of the metal. Abraham weighs to Ephraim the 400 shekels of silver, which he had agreed to pay for the field of Machpelah. They are said, however, to be the current money of the merchant, and yet are received by weight and not by tale. Tale, T-A-L-E, I think that's more tala than tale. In the same manner as ingots of gold and bars of silver are at present. The revenues of the ancient Saxon kings of England are said to have been paid not in money, but in kind, that is, in victuals and provisions of all sorts. William the Conqueror introduced the custom of paying them in money. This money, however, was for a long time received of the exchequer by weight and not by tala. The inconveniency and difficulty of weighing those metals with exactness gave occasion to the institution of coins, of which the stamp, covering entirely both sides of the piece, and sometimes the edges too, were supposed to ascertain not only the fineness but the weight of the metal. Such coins, therefore, were received by tala, as at present, without the trouble of weighing. The denominations of those coins seem originally to have expressed the weight or quantity of metal contained in them. In the time of Servius Tullius, who first coined money at Rome, the Roman as or pondo contained a Roman pound of good copper. It was divided in the same measure as our Troyes pound into 12 ounces, each of which contained a real ounce of good copper. The English pound sterling in the time of Edward I contained a pound, Tower weight, of silver of a known fineness. The Tower pound seems to have been something more than the Roman pound and something less than the Troyes pound. This last was not introduced into the Mint of England till the 18th of Henry VIII. I'm guessing the 18th year of Henry VIII, the 18th year of his reign. The French livre contained in the time of Charlemagne a pound Troyes weight of silver of unknown fineness. The fair of Troyes in Champagne was at that time frequented by all the nations of Europe, and the weights and measures of so famous a market were generally known and esteemed. The Scots money pound contained in the time of Alexander I to that of Robert Bruce a pound of silver of the same weight and fineness with the English pound sterling. English, French, and Scotch pennies, too, contained all of them originally as a real penny weight of silver, the 20th part of an ounce, and the 240th part of a pound. The shilling, too, seems originally to have been the denomination of a weight. When wheat is at 12 shillings a quarter, says an ancient statute of Henry III, then wastrel bread of a farthing shall weigh 11 shillings and 4 pence. The proportion, however, between the shilling and either the penny on the one hand or the pound on the other seems not to have been so constant and uniform as that between the penny and the pound. During the first race of the kings of France, the French sou or shilling appears upon different occasions to have contained 5, 12, 20, and 40 pennies. Among the ancient Saxons, a shilling appears at one time to have contained only 5 pennies, and it is not improbable that it may have been as variable among them as among their neighbors, the ancient Franks. From the time of Charlemagne among the French, and from that of William the Conqueror among the English, the proportion between the pound, the shilling, and the penny seems to have been uniformly the same as at present, though the value of each has been very different. For in every country of the world, I believe the avarice and injustice of princes and sovereign states, abusing the confidence of their subjects, have by degrees diminished the real quantity of metal, which had originally contained in their coins. The Romans, as in the latter ages of the Republic, was reduced to the 24th part of its original value, and instead of weighing a pound came in to weigh only half an ounce. The English pound and penny contain at present about a third only, the Scots pound and penny about a 36th, and the French pound and penny about a 66th part of their original value. By means of those operations, the princes and sovereign states which performed them were enabled in appearance to pay their debts and fulfill their engagements with a smaller quantity of silver than would otherwise have been requisite. It was indeed in appearance only, for their creditors were really defrauded of a part of what was due them. All other debtors in the state were allowed the same privilege, and might pay with the same nominal sum of the new and debased coin whatever they had borrowed in the old. Such operations, therefore, have always proved favorable to the debtor and ruinous to the creditor, and have sometimes produced a greater and more universal revolution in the fortunes of private persons than could have been occasioned by a very great public calamity. And one of the things I heard years ago when I was an insurance agent was the notion that at some point the U.S. deficit would grow to a point where we could not afford to pay off the federal debt. The debt payments just become too great of a percentage of the federal budget, and the way out of that is to debase the currency, to basically cause rapid inflation, because debts would be paid off at the old price and not the new price. I'm guessing there's probably protections built in to that, but it's an interesting thought that a country, in order to pay its debts, just has to increase the money supply to the point where the value of the dollar might have fallen by 75%, and the dollar is now worth a quarter what a quarter would have been last year. And that would be absolutely ruinous to our country as well. But it's an idea that I've heard bandied about before, and by people who are like in the financial industry. And they're like, yeah, eventually this is going to happen because that's what's going to happen. And there's not really any way to avoid it because we can see what the patterns are. We continue to run bigger and bigger deficits, and the share of interest paid to debt as a percentage of the national budget keeps going up. It keeps going up, and that's like, I think our biggest line item right now is interest on the national debt. Not paying it off, we just roll it over into a new round of funding, but we had to pay the interest each time. And just that interest has really started to impact us. But you just inflate your way out of that, and there's not anything anybody can do about it. Anyway, that's just something that occurred to me, that sometimes inflation is proved favorable to the debtor and ruinous to the creditor. It is in this manner that money has become, in all civilized nations, the universal instrument of commerce, by the intervention of which goods of all kinds are bought and sold, or exchanged for one another. What are the rules which men naturally observe in exchanging them either for money or for one another? I shall now proceed to examine. These rules determine what may be called the relative or exchangeable value of goods. The word valuable is to be observed has two different meanings, and sometimes expresses the utility of some particular object, and sometimes the power of purchasing other goods which the possession of that object conveys. The one may be called value in use, the other value in exchange. The things which have the greatest value in use have frequently little or no value in exchange, and on the contrary, those which have the greatest value in exchange have frequently little or no value in use. Nothing is more useful than water, but it will purchase scarce anything. Scarce anything can be had in exchange for it. A diamond, on the contrary, has scarce any value in use, but a very great quantity of other goods may frequently be had in exchange for it. And that was written before the scramble from Africa, and the rise of De Beers in the diamond industry and their chokehold on it. And so even back then, diamonds were considered rare and valuable, but had scarce any value in use. However, we know that diamonds do have they do have value in use. They're used in industrial cutters and grinders. They're used in optics for things like use with lasers and stuff. They do have a utilitarian use. They're just so common that the only reason why they have any real value these days is because of the cachet. They're not even considered money, right? They're just an expensive object that you can buy with money. In order to investigate the principles which regulate the exchangeable value of commodities, I shall endeavor to show. First, what is the real measure of this exchangeable value, or wherein consists the real price of all commodities? Secondly, what are the different parts of which this real price is composed or made of? And lastly, what are the different circumstances which sometimes raise some or all of these different parts of price above, and sometimes sink them below their natural or ordinary rate? Or what are the causes which sometimes hinder the market price, that is, the actual price price of commodities, from coinciding exactly with what might be called their natural price? I shall endeavor to explain as distinctly as I can those three subjects in the three following chapters, for which I must very earnestly entreat both the patience and attention of the reader. His patience in order to examine a detail which may perhaps in some places appear unnecessarily tedious, and his attention in order to understand what may perhaps, after the fullest explication of which I am capable of giving it, appear in some degree obscure. I am always willing to run some hazard of being tedious in order to be sure that I am perspicuous, and after taking the utmost pains that I can to be perspicuous, some obscurity may still appear to remain upon a subject in its own nature extremely abstracted. And that is the end of that chapter. And that's kind of how all of his chapters are written. Some good core concepts, some things that are just kind of, like, I always have issue with his take on history and things like that. But, he was an economist writing in 1776, so, and in the British Empire is on multiple continents at this point, and is growing in power. Haven't quite reached the age of empire yet, really. That would come a few years later, I think, is generally considered the age of empire. This is the age of colonization and which came after the age of exploration. I'm running through how the ages are kind of stacked up in various versions of civilization. Anyway, thank you for watching. I appreciate you joining me, and I will be doing this again later. Thank you so much.